The algorithm. It beckons me. What's up everyone, today we'll be going over the various war crimes of the characters in the Splatoon series. Now I do want to warn you in advance that this list will contain spoilers for Side Order, but before you leave, I won't be going over anything regarding Side Order until the very end of this video. I will also make sure to give another spoiler warning before we get into any of the Side Order stuff, so feel free to stick around until then and then come back later once you've finished Side Order. While you're at it, you might as well splat that subscribe button, and while you're down there, paint the like button blue. YouTube really has consumed me, hasn't it? Anyway, for those unaware, the Geneva Conventions do actually exist in the Splatoon universe. They were mentioned offhand in the background text of one of the scrolls in Splatoon 1, but in 3 we got an entire sunken scroll dedicated to it as shown on screen. Therefore, you cannot leave a comment on this video telling me that the Geneva Conventions don't apply in the Splatoon universe. You're wrong. That out of the way, let's crack on. For a faction effectively named the Death Squad, the new Squidbeak Splatoon has surprisingly few war crimes. If there's one thing Nintendo loves more than filing lawsuits though, it's child soldiers. Agent 3, Agent 4, and the new Agent 3 are all 14 at the time of their respective story modes. On top of that, they also endanger the little buddy. Employing children under the age of 15 for combat is a war crime, so the Squidbeak Splatoon scores a nice 4 off the bat. Moving on, they also commit outrages of DJ Octavio's personal dignity, trapping him in a snow globe in both Splatoon 1 and 2. In total, Craig Cuttlefish is looking at 6 war crimes total, which to be honest is quite pitiful considering later entries on this list. Next up, we have DJ Octavio himself. Starting with his theft of the Zapfish, in both Splatoon 1 and 2, he steals 31 lesser Zapfish and the Great Zapfish in each game, totaling to 64 across both. While the sentience of the Zapfish is unclear, regardless of how you spin things, DJ Octavio has either engaged in excessive appropriation of property or taking of hostages. I understand he wanted to use the Zapfish's power to improve the lives of the Octarians, but that doesn't explain why he built a giant killer robot and powered it with the Great Zapfish. Next, DJ Octavio holds Captain Cuttlefish hostage in both games as well, bringing his total up to 66. In Splatoon 2's story mode, he also brainwashes Callie and compels her into fighting alongside him. Now, this next section will be a little bit difficult to calculate. We know thanks to Marina that DJ Octavio loves child soldiers, but it's hard to estimate how many child soldiers he's employed. We do have some numbers to work with though. Marina is stated to be part of the 83rd generation of soldiers, having joined the Octarian army at age 9. Accounting for time passing since Marina's generation, we can estimate that DJ Octavio is probably at his 85th generation by now, considering Marina's in her 20s. That said, we still need to estimate how many soldiers are part of each generation. We may not have any way to calculate this with certainty, but what I'm going to do is count up the total amount of rival Octarians you face in Octo Valley and Octo Canyon, take the average, and consider that to be a generation. So, in Splatoon 1 you face a total of 33 rival Octolings throughout the campaign, and in Splatoon 2 that number is 52. This averages out to 43. Multiplying that by 85 for each generation, we get a total of 3,655 child soldiers. Adding this to his previous war crimes, DJ Octavio's final total is a fresh 3,722. Now, before I hear about this in the comments section, I intentionally excluded Toxic Mist. I know that gaseous and toxic weapons are considered war crimes, but if you account for the fact that Toxic Mist is used in regular sporting events, I think it's probably safe to say that it's not quite the same as it is in our world. Anyway, let's move on to our next war criminal, Commander Tartar. Right off the bat, he's facing 10,009 cases of unlawful confinement and another 10,007 cases of torture and biological experiments. Of course, he's also employed child soldiers, as Agent 8 is 14. It is hard to say if the other participants he ground up were under 15 though. Since there's nothing hinting either way, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he's only used one child, bringing his total to 20,017 war crimes. Just like Octavio, Tartar holds Cuttlefish hostage, all the while compelling Agent 3 into service using sanitization. And speaking of, each of the Octarians you fight is also being compelled into service the same way. There's no way around this, I had to count every single sanitized enemy you fight in Octo Expansion. In total, there are 1,096. Please subscribe. On a side note, there are some instances in Octo Expansion where infinite enemies can spawn. In such cases, I just counted each spawn point as a single enemy. Anyway, going back to the totals for a second, considering that Agent 8 isn't the only one who attempted the trials, and the fact that they involve killing many of the sanitized Octarians, we'll need to bump this number up from what we had originally. We do know that not all of the participants completed their trials, but I think assuming a 10% completion rate is pretty reasonable. Taking that 10% of participants that succeeded and multiplying them by the number of sanitized Octarians 8 fights, we have a total of 10,960,877 sanitized Octarians over the years. We also can't forget the specific case of Deadfish, which adds just one more to that. Tartar's final war crime comes when he launches an attack on the citizens of Inkopolis, which brings his final tally to 10,980,896 war crimes. Now, there really is only one Splatoon character who could possibly beat Tartar at war crimes, and that would be Mr. Grizz. For starters, he steals 4 lesser Zapfish and the Great Zapfish, the details of which we already discussed in Octavio's section. He also ends up taking Cuttlefish hostage, this time torturing him as well, which brings his total up to 7. This, of course, was all in pursuit of his goal to launch an attack on the planet by unleashing fuzzy ooze via a rocket from space. Just Splatoon things, innit? Of course, this being an attack directed at a civilian population, it will count as a war crime, though only one. The last thing Mr. Grizz does in regard to Splatoon 3's single-player mode is convert all the Octarians using fuzzy ooze, which I've considered to be biological experiments. This means I'm back to counting. In total, there are 961 fuzzy Octarians fought throughout Splatoon 3's single-player campaign, which brings his total up to 969. Nice. That may be all on the story side of things, but Mr. Grizz is also the CEO of GrizzCo. For starters, GrizzCo engages in the excessive appropriation of property in taking the eggs from the Salmonids. Other than that though, their war on the Salmonids is actually pretty clean, ignoring the 7 modified weapons they occasionally deploy. There was one thing I wanted to talk about that I've saved for last though, that being Mr. Grizz's employees. Considering the player characters in each game are 14, that means Mr. Grizz is potentially the biggest employer of child soldiers not just in Splatoon, but all of Nintendo's IPs. In order to estimate the amount of children on GrizzCo's payroll, I'll be assuming that every person who's bought a copy of Splatoon 3 has played Salmon Run at least once. Now, I do understand that this could be a somewhat inaccurate estimate, but it's the best we can do. Assuming it to be true though, we're looking at 11.71 million child soldiers. This brings Mr. Grizz's total war crimes to 11,710,977. Mr. Grizz out of the way, I do want to mention the Salmonids real quick. Surprisingly enough, they do actually follow the Geneva Convention quite well. One of the only war crimes that might be in the question is child soldiers, but even that's questionable. The little buddy we worked with in Splatoon 3 story mode is explicitly stated to be young, but in regard to the small fry and flyfish, there's no direct mention of age. Considering the flyfish are able to expertly pilot flying machines and wipe out my entire crew, I'd even go as far as to say that there's an indicator there that they may not be children at all, but just small salmonids. I also really don't know how I'd go about estimating the amount of small fry you fight in Salmon Run, so we're just not going to, no, please no. I don't want to count anymore. For those reasons, I'll be assuming that all the small fry and flyfish are above the age of 15. That out of the way, the only war crimes the Salmonids commit are during Big Run, where they launch attacks knowing that there will be an incidental damage to the civilian property. Considering the fact that Big Run has only happened 5 times, please bring it back, that means that 5 is their total. Alright, we've reached the point of the video where I will need to present to you the spoiler warning. This next section will be all about side order, so if you haven't finished the DLC yet, please make sure to click off the video now. Maybe drop a subscribe on the channel and come back when you're finished the DLC. So, the war criminal we'll be examining here is none other than Order itself. For starters, it compelled Marina into service, forcing you to fight her at the end of your first run. Moving on to talking about the pellets, while a whole person may not be held hostage, their soul is on some level. It's not entirely clear, but I'm going to count each of the pellets, which brings its total up to 12. With the small stuff out of the way, we can finally talk about grayscaling. It's pretty much just inverse sanitization, so this is going to be counted as a biological experiment. That said, how many people exactly are grayscaled? We know that the people of Inkopolis Square have been acting strangely and presumably have been grayscaled. We also see Order grayscale Inkopolis Plaza and Splatsville for a brief moment. Considering how short a time I actually did this for, I'm only going to count the latter two as individual attacks against civilians. That said, I still will need to estimate the population of Inkopolis Square, and so to do that, I will use the same tactics I used for Mr. Grizz. Considering most of Inkopolis' population has migrated to the Splatlands, I think it's fair to assume that the difference between Splatoon 2 and 3's sales will be fair for this estimate, with 2 having sold 13.6 million copies and 3 having sold 11.71, we are left with a difference of 1.89 million citizens grayscaled. That brings orders total to 1,890,014 war crimes. So, just to recap, in last place we have the Salmonids with a pitiful 5 war crimes. Next up, the new Squidbeak Splatoon comes in with 6. DJ Octavio reaches 4th place with 3,722. In 3rd place, we have our newest antagonist, Order. 1,890,014 is nothing to scoff at, especially with such a short time to act. The series' second biggest war criminal is Commander Tartar with an impressive 10,980,896 war crimes. Still, he can't quite keep up with our number one, Mr. Grizz, the biggest war criminal in Splatoon. With 11,710,977 war crimes, he stands definitively at the top of this list by a margin of 730,000. With that, we arrive at the end of this video. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed, and while you're down there, if you could like the video, I would greatly appreciate it. Anyway, I'll catch you next time.